So you can adjust the camera portrait or choose the appropriate profile that you shot it in camera, and then the red, green, and blue primaries. If you double click any of these, they return to 0. So if we move this over and it's a little bit too green, move it back over if you get lost. You can also adjust the tint to be more, if you have too much green in it or something like that, you can definitely adjust it and make it as close to in camera as you shot it. So it's pretty simple. Usually when I'm shooting around a lot of green, it seeps, the light reflects off of the green bushes and trees and things like that. And I'm able to fix it in the blue primary by adjusting this slider and taking some of that green away. This particular photo doesn't really need it. Maybe a little bit actually. Probably go -10. And there you have it. Then I work my way up. You can do things in Lightroom like add these vignettes and things like that, but it doesn't really give you much control. Not as nearly as much. And we don't really want to add the grain yet because we can add that stuff in Photoshop. So I leave the effects at 0s. For transform, you can transform your image, but I leave those at 0s as well because I shoot it right in camera. But if you need to fix it, you can transform the image a little bit, warping, some things like that. If you have a lens correction and you have a certain type of camera, you can actually choose the camera and you can do the profile correction. I don't need that because my lenses don't need a profile correction. But if you do, you can either enable the lens profile correction and choose the camera that's right for you. If you're shooting on a Canon and you need to fix the lens profile. Let's say you shot this on 18-35. You see what it did? It adjusted it based on that camera. But we don't need to do that, so we're going to go ahead and turn that off. iPhone cameras usually need that. So if you shoot a raw photo in Lightroom on the iPhone app, in the Lightroom iPhone app, you will need to do a lens profile correction if you import them into Lightroom on your Mac or PC. So I do not use those. I do not use this. I do not use that. And for sharpening, we're going to do some intelligent sharpening. I'll show you what I mean. We don't do sharpening inside of Lightroom because, well, we have some issues. If you look at this, it does sort of a global sharpening, which is all over the image. Sure, it kind of looks great, but when you're trying to adjust the skin later in Photoshop to maybe remove some zits or something, you're also going to move the sharpening. So it comes standard on 25 and you can still kind of see it there. We might as well just take this away and we can choose what we want to sharpen in Photoshop with an action that we've created that will make it so we can sharpen just the things that we want to sharpen. Like maybe we want to sharpen these eyelashes, but not these crow's feet. So the way we do that is we leave sharpening at 0 and we shut it off. Now you can scroll up to the top and you can do some primary adjustments. So you can correct the white balance if you want it to be a little bit warmer or what have you. I actually leave it as shot. And the reason is we can probably going to do most of that color and warming and things like that inside of Photoshop. So you can adjust the tint again, just like you did on the camera profile. Probably about a 9. We'll leave it as shot. I like the way I shot it. It's pretty good. Now in here, you can do some tonal adjustments. And when I highlight over these areas, you can see that it highlights them. If I highlight here, you look in the histogram up here, it's going to highlight this area. And if I go into the histogram, if you see down below in here, it will move with it. So you can see the area that you've selected. So a good rule of thumb is to hit auto. If you like it, fine. it's usually off. So I would typically hit auto and then dial things back. Like that's a little bit too high for the exposure. You can also double click on tone and it brings everything back to 0. Our image was shot pretty well, but I do know that I'm going to go with a flatter profile in a post, so I'm going to boost the shadows a little bit, probably somewhere around there, and maybe drop the blacks down a little bit. These are your darkest parts of the image. So I'll probably drop it to like maybe a -9, not much at all. We've really brought out some detail simply by just boosting the shadows there. And the highlights, you can see if we go to the right too far, you see that what happened up there? You see this little triangle told us what happened first. It looks like it was the red value which happened first. You see that? Red's blown out, now yellow, and then just your IRE, your maximum light has been exceeded. So I don't fool around with it too much. You can see that my highlights are within the range of where they should be. And then the whites, this is the very brightest parts of the image. You see on the nose and on the palm of the hand here. It's pretty bright. So if you have a peak up here, it's usually in your whites. And you can bring those whites down and sort of average out the image. But you don't need to do too much here because you're going to do most of it in Photoshop. Clarity and presence, you can mess with these. You've probably seen these in some of your applications like on Instagram and Lightroom Mobile, but it's not really a necessity because we're going to do that in Photoshop. And saturation. No real need to do it unless you know you're going to a black and white photo or something. You can also adjust your tones, your curves, your midtones, and highlights, but I recommend not doing that because we're also going to do that in Photoshop. You also do any secondary corrections in the hue, saturation, and luminance. And if you view all of them, you can, like, maybe you don't like the reds, maybe they're a little bit too harsh or something like that. You can adjust them. I actually leave them all the same, and then we are done. We're going to take this into Photoshop now in the next lesson, and we're going to do some corrections on the acne, bring out some eyes, remove some red spots in the eyes, and brighten these teeth and make them look really nice. And then we're going to draw focus to our talent here. So let's go ahead and do that.